For the ones who work hard to ensure their crew can always go the extra mile, and the ones who get in early so everyone can go home on time, there's Grainger, offering professional-grade supplies backed by product experts so you can quickly and easily find what you need. Plus, you can count on access to a committed team ready to go the extra mile for you. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night.
Welcome to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast, where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker.
And I'll spread the word, and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come. And we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
Before we get to today's guest, I wanted to let you know that we address a tough topic of missing PCT hiker Chris Sherpa Fowler. This episode was recorded well in advance of the coronavirus and all the decision-making that hikers are adjusting to at this current moment. I contemplated even airing this episode because it is tough to talk about a missing hiker, let alone the coronavirus and the implications it is having on the 2020 hiking season. But at the end of the day, my decision was not hard. The fact is, Sherpa is still missing on the PCT in Washington, and any help we as a hiking community can be to the family overrides the tough nature of the topic. Stay safe out there, everybody, and now on to our guest. Welcome back to the Jester Section Hiker Podcast. I'm your host, Julie Jester Gayhart, and this is the podcast where we talk about the continual pursuit of the section hiker and what it takes to complete a trail section by section. On today's podcast, we are joined by Mary Emerick, aka Monkey Bars, who just finished section hiking the Pacific Crest Trail this past summer in August of 2019. Mary started her journey into section hiking the PCT with hiking the John Muir Trail in California in 2011. Mary is also a published author of 2 books, her memoir, Fire in the Heart, and a novel titled Geography of Water. I am very excited to have Mary on the show to talk to her about her journey as a section hiker on the Pacific Crest Trail. Welcome to the podcast, Mary.
Thanks for having me.
Really appreciate you being here. So we'll just jump right into it. And let's go back for a second to 2011, or maybe a little bit prior, because originally you told me you really weren't thinking about hiking the Pacific Crest Trail at all, but then somewhere around 2011, that changed. So talk to us about what got you started thinking about hiking the Pacific Crest Trail, and what changed your mind.
Well, I'd always been a hiker all of my life, but I was a regular backpacker. I'd go out for a couple nights and then come home, and I never thought about staying out longer. And I didn't really even know that was a thing. And I had just moved down from Alaska. We were living on an island in Alaska where you could hike, but it was mostly bushwhacking and there were a lot of bears. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, so we did more kayak camping than we did backpacking. So I moved down to Oregon, and a friend of mine said, "Hey, do you want to hike the John Muir Trail?" And I had worked in Sequoia National Park in the past as a seasonal worker. And so I knew what the JMT was, but I didn't really know what I was getting into. And so we decided to do all the planning for that and to go hike the JMT. And we were on the trail for, I believe, 16 days, which was a revelation to me that all the resupply you had to do, the different challenges and where you're going to camp and the weather. And I thought, this is pretty interesting. I kind of like this. You kind of get into this mode of where you forget about the rest of the world and all it is the trail. And so after that, I started thinking, I could hike just one more section of the PCT and then I'll call it good.
I like that where you say you forget about the rest of the world and get involved in your hike. That is great. So 16 days, is that pretty average or normal on the John Muir Trail? I've heard 3-4 weeks, just depending.
Yeah, I mean, some people do it definitely a lot quicker, and some people take a lot more time. We were kind of hemmed in by our different jobs we had to get back to, and we had some logistics to deal with getting on the trail in the first place. And so this ended up being about 12-mile days, maybe a little bit less some days. And that was actually pretty perfect because the Sierra is so beautiful that you want to take your time.
Nice. Yeah, I've been to Yosemite and been up Half Dome and been out to Clouds Rest, but which leads us to the next thing I wanted to ask you about. It has been crazy trying to get a John Muir Trail permit these last couple years. So when you went out in 2011, was the permit process what it is now, or how's it changed?
Well, it was probably a little bit easier at the time, but at the time, and I don't know what you have to do now, but we had to actually fax in an application. And the fax machine was always busy because everybody was trying to fax in their applications. So you'd have to
Oh, wow.
go down to the fax machine at midnight and start faxing, hoping that you would get
Oh,
a permit.
God.
And what we ended up having to do in order to do the trail at the beginning, because everybody wants to start from Happy Isles in Yosemite, is we had to go off the trail for one night on a side trail and then come back to the trail. And that's how we were able to do it. What I've noticed hiking on the PCT, though, in the last few years is that a lot of people are choosing to go from south to north now, which when I was doing it, hardly anybody did because it's so much more difficult. You have to get up to such a higher elevation right away.
So south to north is Mount Whitney to Yosemite, is that right?
Right. That's correct.
Okay.
Well, that's correct. Yes. Mhm.
Okay. And I would imagine trying to go up Mount Whitney. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. You started, is it Whitney Portal? And then you would
Yes.
go up all those switchbacks, which are what, like 100 switchbacks or something up to Mount Whitney?
Yes, and I think you gain something like 6,000 feet. So if you're just starting
Yeah.
out, that's pretty hard.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially like if you're like me trying to plan, and you're coming from the East Coast and you got to acclimate and all that kind of stuff. So that can get tough. So I can see why people try to start in Yosemite, but that's a good
Mhm.
tip to maybe, go off to a side trail or something like that.
Mhm.
And I know now that like last year when we applied, you can apply like 180 days out and then you get like so many days in the lottery and then you get like your denial email, every day. So it's like, I guess we'll keep trying until we finally get in. So, all right. So 2011, you hike the John Muir Trail and then you get the bug. Like, 2012, you decide, hey, let me take on a little bit more of the PCT. So tell us what you took on in 2012.
So I recruited a friend and we hiked half of Washington, the northern half. And that was from Stevens Pass to Manning Park in Canada.
Okay.
And I think at the time where I was still thinking I'm not going to hike the whole PCT, but there was something about getting to that northern terminus that kind of sparked something in me and thought, this would be pretty cool to hike the whole thing.
Yeah. So you saw the terminus and you were like, now I got to go see the other end of what's
Right.
happening here.
Right.
So let's talk a little bit about, now I've heard a couple different things about the logistics in Canada. So once you get up there, and I guess you would call it summiting, right? You get to
Mhm.
the northern terminus. So is it 8 miles into Canada and then out, or you got to go down a side trail, I've heard, or it's 30 something miles back and then off the trail? How does that work when you finish on the northern end?
Well, you're right. There's an 8-mile trail that leads you out to the road, and you have to apply for a Canada entry permit. So if you have had any convictions in the past few years, they might not let you in.
Oh,
But
God.
but there's nobody sitting there waiting for you. You just hike over the border
Gotcha.
and you get to the road. And at the time that we hiked in, there was a Greyhound bus we could catch to take us back to Vancouver. Now there's not a bus, I believe, so people have to make other arrangements.
Okay. Interesting.
Otherwise, you have to hike back to Harts Pass and get a ride out from there. So it is a little challenging once you get to the end.
So when you end, how far back is Hearts Pass then if you decide you're not going to go into Canada?
I think it's 30 miles, but don't quote me on
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, something like
Okay.
that. Yeah.
It seems something like that. I've heard a
Uh,
couple different things, and then I've heard of people, they start in the north and they're southbounders. They start at Harts Pass, hike to the border, and then turn around and go back too. So,
yes, because you're not allowed to hike in from Canada.
oh, that's why they do that. Okay, that
Mhm.
makes total sense now.
Mhm.
That makes very good sense. So now you've got the hiking bug, right? So
Right.
2012, you hike to the border. You're like, how's all this going to work? What happened after that? So lead us into at some point, you and I had a conversation. You said some sections just can't be hiked because of the heat in the summer. So talk us through how you decided where to go from there.
Well, the same friend that I hiked with, we started thinking, well, it's pretty hard to hike in the spring and the fall where we live because it's very cold and snowy. And maybe there's part of the PCT that we can hike at that time. And so the what everyone calls the desert, which is starting at the border with the US and Mexico, it's pretty nice hiking there in April. And so that we started there at the very beginning and hiked some sections there. Those sections get way too hot in the summer to hike. And same with some of the Northern California sections. Some of them have snow, so you have to work around that, but there are some
Right.
sections that can be hiked a little earlier in the year than others. So some people I've heard when they section hike, they are really sequential. They'll start at the border and hike all the way to the border. And that's a very organized way to do it. But
Right.
we had to be more opportunistic. We were able to look at when the weather was right, when our jobs could we could take a couple weeks off, so it was very piecemeal, which meant that you had to be very careful to start at the exact place where you got off the trail if you're going to do it, continuous footpath.
Right. Right. So how are you guys working out like your logistics? So I think in 2013, you finished the rest of the state of Washington, and I guess you went south down to the Oregon border. Is that correct?
I actually went in 2013. We did finish up Washington,
Okay.
and then we went down to finish some more sections in Southern California, and
Gotcha.
yeah, and just kind of filled in pieces after that. Trying to do about between 100 and 300 miles at a time.
Okay. So are you guys just at this point going, okay, we have, this time off, let's chunk off this section.
Mhm.
What particular like guidebooks and things were you guys using?
Well, and I have to say here that I didn't always have the same hiking partner, so it really depended on that other person and when they're available. In some sections, I did solo.
Gotcha.
We looked a lot at different blogs and YouTubes of when people had hiked different sections and what was there. We used the half mile maps a lot because that's when half mile was being actively updated. And then we have the Pacific Crest. There's some Pacific Crest Trail guidebooks that we looked at. But basically, it was talking to other people that had done it and saying, when would be a good time to do this, talking to trail angels, talking to people we knew who lived around there and figuring it out. And for the most part, we did pretty well. We only got chased
Nice.
out by snow one time.
That's nice compared. I mean, I heard this year it just seemed like the weather this year on the Pacific Crest Trail, it was the year of the snow. It never, like, I know people going through, this is just what I'm seeing like on, YouTube and people's Instagram is, always snow in the Sierra, it seems. But it seemed like the weather, even in Oregon and Washington, did it change early this year, or is that normal for full on snow at the beginning of October?
That's a little early. What was different this year, though, is there weren't very many fires.
Okay.
Usually in Oregon, there's a lot of fires that will close sections of the trail, and Washington as well. And this year, it was pretty slow for fire, so that was good for people. But I actually went to do my last section in June in the Sierra, and I couldn't make it through, so I had to come back in August to finish. There was just too much snow.
Too much snow. Now, do you get into the carrying the ice axe and, spikes? And because I'm hearing that people are having to carry ice axes and spikes to kind of get through the Sierra. Is that common, or is that when people are just trying to go through in the early season?
It's more early season because those people are on a timeline. What's nice about section hiking is that you really can pick your time, within your other parameters and your weather, and so I think almost every section I had, fairly ideal conditions. There were a few, challenging situations, but I didn't feel as compelled that I had to go through the Sierra in the snow, and that's why I bailed out this year in June because I thought I don't need to do this. I can come back.
Right. Right, exactly. You're not on a timeline. It's still going to be there, so you might as well
Right.
go there through there when there's no snow and it's warm. So,
Mhm.
all right. So you started off John Muir. You went up to Washington. You've got Washington finished down to the Oregon border. You've chunked off some sections in California. What made you? Did you just figure out with your schedule that doing 100 to 200-mile chunks was just going to work with your time off, or was it the people you went with, or like a combination?
I think it was kind of a combination, but it really was dictated by a work schedule. I figured that, I could do 20-mile days, basically, sometimes a little more. And I think we mentioned a little bit about logistics. Just getting down to the trail would take a couple days, and then finding some way to get to the trail was challenging too. So more than 2 weeks is pretty tough to take off from work as well. So that even though I wanted to keep going, it really made the best sense to do that amount of sections. But I could
Right.
because of what we were talking about the weather and how some sections you can hike in the spring and the fall, I was able to do a few sections a year, like 3 to 4 sometimes.
And kind of get, with the best weather with what was going to be where. That
Right.
that makes so going back to logistics just a little bit, because I'm very familiar with the Appalachian Trail and logistics there. And a lot of times when people do big sections, they'll leave their car at a hostel and maybe get a ride down to where they want to start and hike back to their car. Is that similar out on the Pacific Crest Trail, or are the logistics a little bit different?
That's somewhat similar. There were some sections I was able to drive to because they were in Oregon, so I could park a car and then get a shuttle. When we went as far down as Southern California, we would fly into an airport, figure out whether we could get a trail angel or an Uber or whatever to the starting point, and then sometimes it made sense to fly out of a different airport. So that made it a little more challenging. There's a pretty good bus system in Southern California that we were able to utilize, so that worked out.
Okay.
There were some great trail angels I was able to utilize, but I guess the biggest challenge for me was for the ones I had to fly to, you really had to kind of think ahead and say, how long is it going to take me to do this section? Because I don't want to miss my plane on the other end. On the other hand, there's been some sections where I got done super early, and I think, well, I don't really want to sit around Bakersfield for 3 days. What am I going to do?
Right. You either keep hiking or, get a flight back early, I
Right.
guess.
Yes, that's what happened.
So interesting. So now we've kind of talked a little bit about the logistics, and it's very interesting. And where in Southern California, there's more of a bus system. Is that what you said?
Yes, there's a great bus system that we used for quite a bit of the sections. There's some shuttles that actually exist to bring people around to the trail and to other places, of course. So for a lot of California, until I got to past the Sierra, I was able to utilize that. That worked out really well.
Wow, that is great.
Hmm.
And from what I'm learning, because I'm learning a lot about the Pacific Crest Trail as far as the logistics, the way the mapping system goes, and I know it's lettered like California's A through R, or pretty close to that, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
So, like if you're talking, you would say, hey, I've done section A in California, section B in California. So, up to 2014, basically, did you go down south and now you're up to the Sierra, or where are we starting right around 2014?
Oh, let's see. I'm trying to remember. I think at that point, I still had some sections in Northern California to fill in and Oregon. Oregon, surprisingly, even though I live in Oregon, took me one of the longest to finish.
That's interesting. Why do you think that?
Because there were some sections. There's in fact one that we call section elusive because
Oh,
of the fire situation. Southern Oregon
okay.
it burns pretty continuously in the summer, and you would start planning to do it, and then all of a sudden a fire would pop up and close the trail. So that one was pretty tough to get.
Wow. So if you're through hiking the trail, do they do an alternate around those when that happens? Or, I'm assuming people just have to go to the road and, connect back up, above the fire. Is that how that works?
Sometimes people can do that. A lot of times the agency that's managing that area really tries to give you a reroute that you can use, but sometimes there just
Okay.
isn't anything. So people have had to hitchhike around closed sections.
And I guess that's the beauty of being a section hiker. You can say, well, all right, well, I'll either get in the car and go to a different section that I need to do, or I'll just replan this and, try this again. So walk us through kind of 2015 to your finish.
Okay, so in 2015, I concentrated a lot on Northern California. I mean, the whole state of California on the PCT is 1,700 miles. So that's a pretty big chunk just to finish California. So by the time the thru hikers get to Oregon, they're pretty sick of California. But yeah, I was concentrating on that. I did some of the lower Southern California sections in 2015 as well. So mostly California in 2015.
Okay. And then I'm assuming 2016, 17, and 18 are California as well.
Yes, California finishing up, and then Oregon, starting on Oregon and finishing up Oregon.
Okay. So it's interesting. We talked about your finish on the trail. And most of the time when people finish, you think of big parties and everybody's celebrating. And talk about your finish for us.
Well, it was a little anticlimactic. But it was in a beautiful spot. It was in the Sierra. And what I had to do was hike 22 miles one way and then hike back to where my car was, because there's no way out except going over Mount Whitney, and I was not doing that again. So,
oh, come on.
So
you wanted to go over those switchbacks again. Come on.
So I got up and I hiked down there's a sign that marks where Crabtree Meadow is, and it's where you start to go to the Mount Whitney climb, or you keep going north on the PCT. And that little sign was my finish. And that's where we ended the JMT. It didn't end the JMT, but that's where we went by it when we went to climb Mount Whitney on the JMT.
Gotcha.
So it was about 7 a.m, and there wasn't anybody around. And I thought, here I am.
Mary.
And luckily, 2 thru hikers came through. People were flip-flopping on the Pacific Crest Trail all year last year because of the snow. So they were finishing up the Sierra too. And so I said, will you take my picture? I just finished the PCT.
Did they celebrate with you though? That's important.
Well, they wanted to make some miles, so they didn't really stick around. So it was a little anticlimactic, but it was still pretty rewarding. The hike out 22 miles was kind of a reflective time where I started thinking about all the other sections and I think it's appropriate to say sacrifices that you make to section hike, because it is very challenging in some ways. More
absolutely, I agree with that. Yeah. So you've had your finish, but there's a couple other things that you and I originally talked about in our original conversation. And there's a couple questions I want to ask you. So you stated that you found it challenging to find hiking partners that shared the same hiking style as you. So expand on that for a little bit.
Well, I think, you can usually get someone to go backpacking with you, hike 8 miles
Right.
or something into a lake, put up your tent, hang out, get up, be leisurely over coffee. People like doing that. People don't necessarily enjoy getting up before dawn, throwing everything in your pack and hiking 22 to 26 miles a day. That's not most people's idea of a good time. So that you have to get past that barrier first. And then I did find some pretty dedicated section hikers. But then, people have their different ideas of how they want to hike. Some people want to have their partner with them all the time and within sight. Other people don't care if you go ahead or they go ahead, or you just meet up at camp. So figuring that out is a little bit challenging sometimes. And then the whole making decisions element of it. I tend to be someone who kind of talks over decisions, and to some people that might seem like I'm waffling over decisions instead of just saying, this is what we're going to do. So I had some great hiking partners on the PCT. I have to say I really enjoyed my solo time as well, just because I could make my own decisions. And if I wanted to go farther, I could. If I didn't, then I could stop, that kind of thing.
Right. And sometimes, that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, a lot of people hike by themselves, and a lot of people hike with hiking partners, but sometimes it's like, it's okay not to agree on everything.
Mhm.
And it's okay if you want to, take your time and make a decision versus, maybe jumping into something, because from what I'm learning on the Pacific Crest Trail, I mean, you really do have to take time and make decisions, especially if you're getting up in snow, if you might be getting into an area that, has a fire or whatever. And I'm also learning with side trails and things like that, it can be really challenging to actually get off the trail if you need to. Did you
Mhm.
find that when you were out there as well?
I did. There was one situation where we're in Southern California actually, and we were caught in a snowstorm, and the
Oh,
snow
wow.
just kept coming, and so we had to find on the map a Forest Service road that we could hike out and hitchhike to a town. And so that does happen, and I think everyone's comfort zone is different as well. So just figuring out, when you feel okay of going forward, but maybe your partner doesn't, or vice versa. I had an injury on the trail, my only one, that caused me to stop hiking. I had to go home and rest, and just making sure that your partner, do they want to keep going? Are they're self sufficient, so they could keep going, but do they want to stop with you? I mean, just making those calls is something that I wasn't great at asking people before we started hiking. I feel like I'm getting better at it
Right.
because in the end, if you're a section hiker and you decide to section hike a whole trail, that's your goal, and so it's hard to compromise that goal.
Yeah, very hard, very hard. And you also said another thing that's interesting. You said you found it challenging to hike in a through hiker bubble. So talk to us a little bit about that.
I'm kind of competitive, so
No, Mary, no.
so so I would see what the through hikers are doing. I thought, "Oh, I could do that too," not realizing that, oh, they've been hiking for 4 months already. And then I would meet people that I really liked, so I wanted to camp with them at night, and so probably pushing past what I should have sometimes. That was a little challenging. The other thing that's kind of makes you humble is that you feel like you're in pretty good shape. I feel like I'm a pretty decent hiker, but these
Right.
hikers have been hiking, since the Mexican border, and they just blaze right by you. And you're just thinking, wait, what happened?
Wait, yeah. See, they've got the trail legs, and every time a section, that's one thing about being a section hiker. Every time you go out, it's like you're building your legs. So
Exactly. Hmm.
so I can relate with that, with trying to keep up with through hikers too, because you just want to talk to them and hang out, and
Hmm. Hmm.
yeah, and then they blow by and you're like, well, all right, it was
See
nice
ya.
seeing you. So, well, Mary, congratulations on completing your Pacific Crest Trail section hike just a few months back, really. I've got a question for you that we didn't talk about. How have you been since you've completed it? Meaning, like, mentally. Are you working on your next section hike somewhere else, or are you kind of sitting back, seeing what's going to happen? Or did you already have in your mind, hey, this is going to be my next trail?
Well, I have to be honest, I was a little depressed for a while.
Yeah,
It shapes your life, right, doing these sections. And I've been trying to figure out what I want to do next. I'm not sure that I want to section hike a really long trail again, just because sometimes on the Pacific Coast Trail, let's be honest, there's some less than stellar sections. And I kept thinking, well, life is short. There's other beautiful trails. I don't need to be road walking, for example. So it's been a challenge since I got back to figure out what I want to do next. I think it's funny, I kind of laughing when I say this, but I'm going to do one section of the Arizona Trail and see what happens.
well, that one's only, I say only, it's still a 900-mile trail.
Right.
And I've heard it's absolutely gorgeous. That one eventually is on my list as well.
Mhm.
So, hey, I say go for it. And well, if history repeats itself, you know what's going to happen. You're going to do the one section and you're going to be like, well,
I
okay, let's do.
do. Right. And I am intrigued by the Appalachian Trail. It looks, in terms of the elevation gains and the what do I want to say? The grade. It looks harder than the Pacific Crest Trail. Plus, you have the rain to deal with. So I'm not sure about that one, but I am intrigued.
Well, come on, Mary. You're hey, you've got a place to stay in Charlotte. I'm 2 hours from the trail, and we'll just take you out and see what you think.
Okay, sounds good.
So before we end the interview here, I want to turn the topic a little bit because it's involved with the Pacific Crest Trail. And it's a hard thing to talk about, but it's actually a reality that can happen and does happen. So there's a gentleman, his name is Chris Sherpa Fowler, and he's actually the son of a very close friend of my younger sister. And he actually went missing on the Pacific Crest Trail in 2016, and he still has not been found. And when I brought this up to you, you knew exactly who I was talking about. So tell us what you know about the area where Chris Sherpa went missing and how that's actually impacted you as a hiker.
Well, I've never met Sherpa, but I think about him all the time. For some reason, it just struck a chord with me. And the area where he went missing is beautiful. It's beautiful and remote. And in October, Chris was probably one of the only people on the trail.
Wow.
So I think about what happened. I try to think about it and figure it out. I can't figure out what happened. I know that the weather wasn't great when he was out there, but it's still a mystery. And the way that it's affected me is I've become a lot more careful on the trail. I carry a satellite beacon now, and
Okay.
yeah, which I never did before. There's a section that I did it's the elusive section in Oregon that I did in October one year, just because that's the only time it wasn't on fire. And it was torrential rain most of the section. And I found myself getting pretty hypothermic. And I started thinking about Chris and
Mm.
how quickly things can go wrong. And so I took a side trail down to a little resort and dried out and got a cabin, dried everything. And I probably would not have done that if I hadn't heard Chris's story, because I probably would have thought, oh, I can keep going, I'll be fine. But once you get in that situation, your thought processes change somewhat because you're so cold and wet. But I do have to say that his story haunts me, and
Yeah.
I really hope he's found someday.
I hope he's found too. It is such it like you said, it's a mystery because from what I know, and just from the Facebook page, and I'll put Sherpa's Facebook page information in the show notes as well because it's a great site just to um, try to keep up with what's happening. And when I know they still have search parties when it's available based on the weather and things like that. It's just a mystery. Nothing of his has been found that I know of. Is that correct?
I think so. There's some question over one item that was found last year, but it hasn't been verified. I think if you can say anything good came out of this, Chris's stepmom, Sally, has been so great about allowing other family members of missing hikers to post on the Facebook page. And that has caused other people to be aware of those people that are missing. In some cases, they've been found alive, other cases, unfortunately, not. But it's become sort of this family on that page. And I think
Yeah.
when you hike the trail, you are a family. And I think that's why it's affected people so much. And I hope that it's inspired other hikers to be safer on the trail, because it can feel very safe sometimes because you are on this pretty well-maintained trail. There are places where there's not a lot of roads, but you can get off, eventually. There's other people on the trail. So there's a tendency on the part of some, I think, to take it more lightly than it should be taken.
Right, right. And I know one thing you said that you thought people had a dangerous reliance on like gut hook and things like that.
Mhm.
It's awesome to have, because I use gut hook myself. It's awesome to have gut hook, but you also want to have, other maps and things of the area and be knowledgeable and specifically weather as well. Especially, I know Chris was up there in October, and I know people were hiking through there in October this year as well. And like you, I mean, him going missing has affected me as a hiker too, because whenever I go to make decisions, if there's a water crossing I have to go through, I think 2 and 3 times now, not just twice, about my decision. And if I'm hiking with somebody, it affects them too. So I really pray that he needs to be found. I
Hmm.
mean, just closure for Sally. And I mean, I know in the towns near where he was missing that there's still flyers up about him and what his gear looks like and things like that. So hopefully there'll be closure to that soon in 2020 for sure. And I know you talked about maybe if there's another search day that you might attend one of those.
Yes.
Are you still thinking about that? Like they'll probably have that in the spring or early summer.
Probably, there's a lot of snow in that area, so I would probably say July or August is when you can access it. And like I said, it's a gorgeous area and it's impossible not to feel inspired. And I guess the only thing I can think about, I look at pictures of Chris and he looks so happy on the trail. And the only thing I
Yeah.
can think about is that he got to have that experience. And I know that's not much comfort, but he is someone that has touched so many people even though we never knew him.
Exactly. Exactly. Again, Mary, thank you so much for sharing your section hiking story. And now you're heading out to the Arizona Trail. And I feel like when you get on the Appalachian Trail, you're going to be doing that one too. So you're definitely going to have to keep me posted when you're coming to the East Coast. So, a couple more questions for you. I've gotten some emails from some listeners, and they've actually asked me to ask our guests some particular questions. So, real quick, the first one is what is your one luxury item you take with you when you're section hiking or backpacking, no matter what?
I always bring something to read, and usually that's a Kindle because I can't go in my tent at Hiker Midnight, which is probably about 9 o'clock, sometimes earlier, and just lie there all night. So I love to read at night, and so I don't care how much it weighs. I'm going to bring something to read.
I actually like that. So the second one is what is something that you failed at and learned from while hiking?
I don't think at the beginning I was a very good hiking partner, and some might argue I'm not still, but I'm working on it. I think I always had outdoor jobs where I worked alone, and I just got used to being pretty independent. And so when I started hiking the JMT, there were three other people with me. And so I had to take into consideration what they wanted, and it wasn't always what I wanted. And I'm not sure I was always graceful about that. In fact, I know I wasn't always graceful about that. And even into this hiking on the PCT, the rest of it, I know there were times when I probably could have been more considerate of my hiking partners instead of more focused on my goal. And I keep working on that and hopefully someday will be better. But I have learned from some of the really good hiking partners I've had of thinking of others and knowing that it's not just my experience but theirs. And if I want to have my own experience, then just do it solo. So I think I've failed in the past at being a good hiking partner to people, but I've also learned when I need to go solo and when I can go with others. I think that's the main thing.
And that's a very valuable lesson because hiking solo is a thing in and of itself. I mean, some people won't hike solo. So to figure that out is awesome as well. So now we've come to the point in the podcast where the guest is going to sign off for us by reading their own journal entry, statement, or quote that will inspire us to keep hiking section by section.
So, what I wanted to read is a little different. I am writing a memoir about being a kayaker. And even though this is about kayaking, I think there's some similarities in long distance kayaking and hiking. So I was trying to get in the mindset of someone who does this repetitive activity for a long period of time. So that's what I'm going to read.
Sounds good.
Okay. Sometimes when I paddled 8, 10 hours a day, I could let my mind slip into the marathon zone, the same place I got to when I ran 26 miles at a time. This was a place where the mind and the body forgot pain. I didn't mark each mile by the laborious pull past a craggy headland. Instead, it was as if I'd broken through to a layer of light and air where there was no brain, only muscle and heart and bone. As if propelled by some ancient seagoing memory, my body took over completely, unfettered by the constant thoughts and limitations that held it back. At those times, my boat flew over the water like an arrow shot from a bow, and when something startled me out of it, I noticed I had come for miles without noticing the distance. I craved this zone like a junkie needing a fix. I had chased it all my life, whether it came from hiking up mountains all day long, running for hours, or now paddling. The problem was I never knew when it would happen, that inaudible click when it all aligned and I slid between awareness and meditation. This desire, I realize now, as I lined up the boat for another run at the chop, was what had kept me traveling for years past most other seasonal workers' expiration dates. In a regular job, in a regular life, how often could you get there?
All right, Mary, I cannot thank you enough for being on the podcast. I really, really, really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thanks, Mary, for sharing your Pacific Crest Trail section hiking journey with us on the podcast. I'm glad you got the section hiking bug after getting to the northern terminus of the PCT and were able to complete the trail this past fall after 8 years. I look forward to hearing about your future section hikes and all the adventures you will continue to have out on the trails. This episode of the Jester Section Hiker podcast is dedicated to Chris Sherpa Fowler, who went missing on the Pacific Crest Trail in October of 2016. If you want more information about Sherpa, please join the dedicated Facebook page titled Bring Chris Fowler, Sherpa, Home. Next up, we have Let's Talk Gear with Steve Kammeyer as we continue our talks about gear. Welcome back to Let's Talk Gear with Steve Kammeyer. On today's episode, we are going to focus on learning more about the hammock. From what I've learned over the years of section hiking is that individuals that use hammocks are very loyal and love them and would never go back to using a tent. Steve has a vast knowledge of hammocks, and I can't wait to hear what he has to tell us about brands, styles, how to set them up, and everything else that goes along with hammocking. Welcome back to the podcast, Steve.
Thank you, as always, for having me, and I am excited to get into this argument. Let's go.
I knew you would be. I'm not sure if I should be getting out my pocketbook again and buying a hammock at the end of this, or because as you guys heard in the last episode, I got to buy Z poles, hiking poles, and I still have to buy a quilt. So the list is adding up. So
we'll get you.
All right, Steve, I guess we will get right into it with hammocks. So the first question is, why hammock?
That's an excellent question. There are a couple of different reasons why a lot of people prefer hammocks. And first, before we go any further, this is one of the, I'm going to say the most jokingly, lovingly hatred conversations that any backpacker could ever have, because it's tents versus hammocks it's like, I don't know. It's just bad.
I don't know. It's like trail runners versus boots.
It's even worse than that. It's even worse than that. But okay, so honestly, the one nice thing about hammocks is that you don't necessarily have to have flat land to lay on. If you're in a tent, obviously you need to choose yourself out a nice, fairly flat piece of land and pitch your tent. With a hammock, as long as you have a couple of trees or whatever, you can pitch on a very, very steep hill and you can still sleep comfortably. With that being said, those people who love hammocks and swear it's the best sleep that they've ever had in their life. They don't like sleeping on the ground, and I can appreciate that. I definitely can. I am a tent person through and through and through. I've tried hammocks numerous times. I just can't get comfortable in hammocks. But also for a person like me, the one thing about hammocks that a lot of is a benefit for some is a real big negative for me. If I'm hiking, camping, climbing above tree line, above 10,000 feet, if I don't have trees, I can't hang a hammock anywhere. So
right, yeah.
While it is good on that climb up the mountain where I might not be able to find a nice flat piece of ground, I can hang between two trees. But once I get above tree line, I have to have a tent, period. There just is no other way around it. A hammock will not work for me.
Because I'm not a hammock person either, what do you actually get when you purchase a hammock? I know when you purchase a tent, you get the tent, you get the fly, you get the stakes, on and on. What do you get when you actually purchase a hammock?
And just like tents, it really depends on what you want and what kind of kit you want to get here. Some people prefer just to start off with just a basic hammock. That's it, which is just a piece of material and straps to tie it up to a tree. And that's it. That's all. Since the explosion of hammocks in the backpacking world a few years ago, some of these manufacturers have gone crazy, which is beautiful to see. Nowadays, you can get bug nets built in. You can have ridge lines. You can get your tarp. You can have everything all in one piece if you wanted to. So honestly, that just really depends on how you hike, what your preference is, and of course, what your budget is too. Some of these all-in-one type dealios can get pretty costly, whereas a lot of folks like to kind of piece it together, get your hammock, then go with your bug net, then go with your tarp. And then there's all kinds of other little accessories and doodads and add-ons and all kinds of other little stuff that you can get to go along with it. And again, I think that's one of the reasons why people who love hammocks love them, because they are so, I don't want to say complicated, but they are so intensive and there's so many moving parts and there's so many variations. If you buy a tent, like you said, you have your tent, you have poles, you have stakes, that's it. Game over. You're done. Hammocks are forever changing, forever evolving. You can switch out hardware every day if you wanted to. There's just so many different variations, and that's why, again, going to a hammock hangers event is like going to a car show. There's so many different cars, so many different years, so many different makes, so many different models, and everybody is so proud of their setup. If you walk through a tent camping, everyone's just like, yeah, I have a tent, so what? No big deal.
Yeah.
But
it's over here. I'm getting ready to go to sleep. I will say one thing. Yeah. I will say one thing that I have seen people that hammock, I am in all of them because they know how to set it up. They know what everything means. And I'm over here going, oh my God, that just seems like a lot of work. But I really actually do want to try out a hammock, but I don't even understand the straps to hang it with. Some people say you can get really level. To me, I feel like my back would be killing me when I got up in the morning. So talk to us about the importance of the straps, hanging it, a certain amount of feet in between the trees. Talk to us about that aspect of it.
Well, and again, this is going to be 100% personal preference. Some people like to lay flat. Some people like to have their head slightly elevated. Some people, and this is where you can kind of save weight, because believe it or not, hammocks are an extremely heavy way to go about packing. I know I'm going to catch a lot of backlash over that one, because everyone swears, oh, a hammock is lighter than, a tent. And essentially it's really not. Most of the time it's actually not. A tent is usually lighter, but say a 11-foot hammock is a pretty common length. Well, if you're only a 5-foot girl or 5-foot man, I guess, you might actually have someone custom build you a shorter hammock, which means your span between trees will be a little bit shorter. Some bigger guys like to go monster hammocks where they might need a little bit extra space. And this is one thing where just getting your hammock, getting yourself a basic, cheaper setup, I would say probably, and get your feet wet in the hammock world first. Go out, hang it, have some fun, learn about it. You are going to need to learn a few knots. You are going to have to probably dial up YouTube, which is another great thing about hammock camping. And that's actually how I learned a lot of stuff about hammocks myself, YouTube videos, learning about the different parts, the different pieces, the different knots, and learning about people's preferences about how they sleep, what works best from them, and what kind of weather conditions.
So what is the average weight of a hammock? Just say somebody has a complete setup, they're throwing it in their backpack. What is the weight?
Well, and again, this just really honestly depends. A hammock itself, you're probably looking at a pound, probably.
Okay.
Which doesn't sound like much at all. But what if you're going to be in some rain? Now you have to carry a tarp with you. So you need something to keep the rain off of you. What if you're going to be in a situation where there's bugs? Or what if you just don't like bugs, period, and don't like the idea of sleeping outside, which is me. I'm not a real big cowboy camper type of a person. And we did talk about that a couple episodes ago when we were talking about the low to high route. And that's still... Yeah,
where you're going to sleep with your sheet and stuff.
Yeah, so. That still freaks me out a little bit. But if you're going to be, or if you just don't like bugs, or if you're going to be in an area where there may be bugs, you're going to want to take a bug net with you. Now this, again, now we're going to have to talk about temperatures. If it's even slightly chilly outside, you're going to want a underquilt. And this is actually
that's what I was going to ask you.
Right. This is a piece of gear that you don't need if you're in a tent, but you do need if you're in a hammock, which is basically a quilt that goes underneath your hammock to keep your bottom side cool or warm. Sorry.
So you have to have an underquilt and a sleeping bag or quilt?
Correct. Yeah. Most people go under quilt and top quilt. So now not only does that add more cost to your setup, it adds more weight to your setup. And now you're carrying 2 quilts instead of 1. And quilts are one of the most space consuming items that we, carry with us. Your tent is going to take up so much space. There's just nothing you can do. You can't make your tent any smaller than what it is. And quilts take up a lot of space also. So once you start carrying top quilt, under quilt, tent, tarp, bug net, all your stakes, all your guy lines, all your ropes, all your everything, now you have a pretty heavy and a pretty extensively large bundle of gear for your setup.
Interesting. So what are some brands of hammocks? I know I've seen them, at the big box stores and basically any outfitter store that I go into, but what's everybody using?
Sure. Oh, and this is, just like that old,
I know. Here we go.
Car show. Do you want to drive a Dodge, a Chevy, a Ford? Are you a Cadillac type of a person? I think we all know Eno. The Eno double nest is probably one of the most famous hammocks out there. And that's really kind of one of those hammocks that really got the ball rolling in the hiking world. But then all of these little cottage vendors have just really honestly taken off after that. Dutchware makes a couple of beautiful models, some of the most popular hammocks out there, and they're pretty affordable too. And I personally just fell in love, and I'm going to give one of my buddies a big plug here because we can do that.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Jason Flowers out of Walhalla made me an absolutely gorgeous hammock. And it's something for me to look at. I don't really use it that often. I can say that, but it's
Jason.
It's an absolutely beautiful hammock. And it's like a $250 piece, but truly it has the built-in bug net. It's a double layer. It's made with a mono material, which is just a truly gorgeous and super ultralight material, and yet it's still strong enough to hold my big old butt up off the ground too. So
that's the other thing. I have a fear that I'll wake up in the middle of the night and like all of a sudden I'll just be slammed on the ground. I don't know why. Steve, I have these things. So I'm like, did I get that tight enough? I feel like I'd be worried about that all day. Or all night. I'd be worried all day about setting it up. And then I'd be worried all night about if I was going to fall out of the tree. So, so when it comes to hammocks, what do I not want to skimp out on when I buy a hammock?
Straps. And there again, I think a lot of people have that same fear that you do. There are the traditional straps, which tend to be a little heavier. And what that is it's like a piece of 1.5 inch webbing that wraps all the way around your tree. And then you cinch it up with an actual metal buckle, kind of similar to you would like a belt. And those are great. And those are pretty much foolproof, but they are a little bit heavier. Nowadays, there's all kinds of different slings and cordage and all kinds of different ways that you can go about hanging your hammock safely, still getting the same job done, still holding the same weight, but just go as light as you possibly can. Because again, with a hammock, you're carrying so many different gadgets and so many little parts, pieces that go along with it. And this is still a work in progress. Hammock camping just really came a thing a few years ago. So this is a ever evolving aspect of the backpacking world. And as far as businesses go, things are changing daily.
And like I said, I am truly in awe of those that I see out on the trail that are, hammock campers, because they've got it dialed in. They seem to have everything they need. Everything's level, all that good stuff. And
Right.
it just makes me nervous, but that's just me. There's a lot that makes me nervous. But am I carrying a sleeping pad when I hammock?
That again is going to be personal preference. Most people do not. Most people not only prefer not to, but they find that you're not gaining any real comfort. The beauty of sleeping in a hammock is sleeping in a hammock. You don't really need a sleeping pad. For most of us, it's just dead weight. Now, where this might be a little bit different is if you are in some pretty colder temperatures. The one thing that we use sleeping pads for, well, two things. One of the main two things that we use sleeping pads for in a tent is for the insulating properties. Most of us think sleeping pad, we want mattress, we want thick, we want cushiony, we want to get ourselves up off of the ground. But really, another main reason of your sleeping pad is the R value, or the insulating properties. It's keeping the ground from the cold from seeping into your body. And when you put a sleeping pad in a hammock, you're essentially doing the same thing. So although you may have a underquilt with you, if you're in some super, super cold temperatures, you might want to double that up and have your underquilt and then a sleep pad inside of your hammock to help out, just keeping you a little bit warmer.
Perfect. And I did have a question. I was going to say advantages, disadvantages versus a tent, but I don't really think, I think it's personal preference. Like you've said, I think if you hammock, and if you tent, you tent. And
Exactly.
like you try one and, you try the other, and you basically have to figure out what works for you. Would you agree with that?
For sure. Absolutely. For sure. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've had people come to me looking to sell tents because they want to get into hammock camping. And then 6 months later, they're back, hey, you have, a tent for sale, because they want to go back. And I mean, I say it like that, but that actually works both ways too. I have a lot of people that are saying, hey, I think I want to try out, a tent. I'll carrying all this gear with me for a hammock is getting a little bit crazy. And I think a lot of it has to do with this too. And we're going to go back to that whole couples and kids and all that stuff. While hanging next to somebody is super cool, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever. Sleeping in a tent with them is a little more personal, obviously. And then this has, children also too, younger kids, especially. A lot of folks will want to be in a tent where they can have a little bit more protection and a little bit more close to their kids, as opposed to passing out 12 feet away while your kid's just kind of over there swinging in the trees with the bears running around. So, this is truly, truly, truly personal preference. Those who love hammocks love them. Those who don't.
End of story. So Before I let you go, Steve, I know you attend, I called it the Hammock Rally, but it actually has a different name. Talk to us about that event that you attend and why that's important for you.
Yeah, this was one of the most fun events that I have ever been to before. And I've been to quite a few events earlier this year, and I will never miss another one. Believe me, this was just so much fun. The Palmetto State Hangers Group out of South Carolina invited me. They have 4 or 5 different group hangs. And again, this is where I got that whole car show mentality, because you show up and it's like these people are sitting out in their lawn chairs next to their hammock setups, and they are so willing to talk about it. I mean, you can ask anything. They're more than, hey, climb up in there, lay down. Let me show you this. Let me show you that. And people just walk from hammock setup to hammock setup, just checking out everyone's gear. And it's so much fun. It's absolutely so much fun. The one that I went to this past year was called the Fall Sprawl. They also have a frozen butt hang in February every year. Yeah, they have a few different ones throughout the year. And they have swamp butt during the summertime. And it's just, but this group of people is so amazingly fun to be around. It's just, it's like just this big party, and it's family friendly for sure. And they have this thing, and I will never forget this. There's this bacon thing going on, and I love bacon. I've never eaten so much bacon in a 4-day period in my entire life. I mean, literally, there's bacon cooking 24 hours a day for 4 straight days. It is incredible. I forget. Somebody actually told us how many pounds we went through. It was like 40 pounds of bacon. I'm not sure, but it was a lot.
Jeez.
But just a super, super fun group. And this is the same with almost every single hammock hangers group. Again, because these people are so in tune with their gear, their mentality is to share, not just share knowledge, but share everything. It's like this big hippie commune of hammock people hanging from trees. It's just so much fun. Truly, truly it is. So yeah, I am definitely looking forward to the Fall Sprawl in South Carolina again this year. It's at the Santee State Park, or at least that's where it was at last year. And we just kind of take over the whole park for the weekend, and it's so much fun.
Perfect. I think what I'll do is look up some information on that and actually put it in the show notes in case people want information on that and actually want to attend the Fall Sprawl or
Beautiful.
the something but you said earlier. So
I will be there. Come on and see me.
All right, cool. Thanks again, Steve, for chatting with us. And please, please, please go check out Steve's pages on Facebook listed in the show notes. We would love to have Steve answer some of your gear questions on the podcast. So if you have questions, please send them to me via email at jesternc2212@gmail.com. And as always, if Steve answers your question on the podcast, I will send you some of those awesome backpacking gear flea market stickers. Thanks everybody for listening, and happy section hiking.
I'm wondering if you'd go wandering with me through the wilderness and woods to where the winds are blowing free, through the darkness of the night, heading toward the morning light. I wonder if you'd wander with me, and I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods. You're wondering if I go wandering with you, what kind of trouble we'll get ourselves into. Would it be wrong to tag along with a band of vagabonds? You wonder if I'd wander with you. So I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river. I'm wondering if you'd come wandering my way, if you ever get lost or if the trail leads you astray. The music of the pack can always bring you back. I wonder, can we wander away? And I'll spread the word and you beat the drum. We'll round up the troops and get the gang to come, and we'll leave the streets and these neighborhoods, head over the river and through the woods.
For the ones who work hard to ensure their crew can always go the extra mile, and the ones who get in early so everyone can go home on time, there's Grainger, offering professional-grade supplies backed by product experts so you can quickly and easily find what you need. Plus, you can count on access to a committed team ready to go the extra mile for you. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.